Hey y'all. So today's purpose of the video is we want to get into photosynthesis. What is the overall purpose of photosynthesis? And then specifically, we're also going to zoom in to the stages that are involved in photosynthesis. Now, I do want to name that in this video, we're not going to go super deep into the electrochemical gradient and all that stuff. We are going to talk about the two stages, but we're going to keep it in a real overview. That way, if you need to go deeper, you at least are going in with a really, really good understanding. And I promise you, this video will give you that great understanding of the two stages. As we go into this video, you should be able to answer 3 questions by the end of this. The first is, what is the purpose of photosynthesis and the reactants and products that are involved in it? What are the stages of photosynthesis and where do they occur? And the third question is, what is the relationship between the reactants and products of photosynthesis? All of that will be able to be answered by the end of this video, and that is a guarantee. So let's go into the first part, which is, what is the whole purpose of photosynthesis? Plants, so that lets us know who does it, convert carbon dioxide, water, and we're also going to add here light, energy, and they use that to store chemical energy in large carbon molecules called glucose. And they also release oxygen as a waste, a byproduct, meaning it makes this, but it doesn't need it. So it just releases it as a byproduct. The formula to remember this process is here. 6 CO2 plus 6 water plus light makes C6H12O6, which is glucose, and 6 oxygen. Now, I do have a very, very silly way of remembering this, but it really helps, especially when you're trying to figure out the reactants and the products that are involved in photosynthesis. I'm going to represent this side as our reactants to match our screen right here. And I'm going to use this side to show our products. Now, I'm going to sing the song first, and then I'm going to break it down, and then I'll just do one more overview of the song. So the song is 6 CO2, 6 H2O, sunlight always coming through the door. C6H12O6 and 6O2. Super silly song, but if you're someone who loves music and who can remember rhyme, this can help you remember the formula. Now, let me break it down, starting our reactants. I say 6 CO2 to show that the plant takes in carbon dioxide, okay? I say 6 water, 6 H2O, and I go like this to show that the water travels from the roots to the leaves of the plant, which is where photosynthesis occurs. So 6 H2O, and then sunlight, little sprinkle fingers, sunshine always coming through the door. So that's showing that solar energy is needed. Now I switch to this side for the products to show that this is what is being made when we take in those 3 things. So I hold like a food because glucose is food and stored energy for the plant. So it's C6H12O6. And then I show 6 oxygen, 6 O2 flowing away because they release it into the atmosphere for us to use. So now with that breakdown, I will do the song one more time. Cringe with me for a moment and let's go ahead and dive into it. 6 CO2, 6 H2O, sunlight always coming through the door. C6H12O6 and 6O2. Hopefully that helps you remember because we're going to test your knowledge right now. Take 15 seconds, either remembering the song or the equation, and I want you to go ahead and answer this question. You can pause the video now. Okay, hopefully you chose A because that is the correct answer. So another question that we said we were going to answer by the end of this video is where, right, does photosynthesis happen? And it says here, photosynthesis occurs in the organelle chloroplast, and it is located within plant cells only. So here we have a leaf, and if we zoom into the leaf, we should see a plant cell. As we zoom into the plant cell, you should end up seeing multiple chloroplasts. So if you're wondering where chloroplasts are located, it is within the plant cells that are located within the leaves of plants, not in the roots, not in the stem, but in the leaf. Now, in the chloroplast, there are 3 parts to it. One is a stroma. It's kind of like that open space, which has the kind of like liquid jelly-like substance. We have granum, which looks like the whole stack of coins or cookies. One of them is called a thylakoid, or you can think like thylacoin, right? Because one coin represents a thylakoid. And then if you put a bunch of those coins together, you get the granum. And these specific parts of the chloroplast are going to be important when we go into our two stages. This diagram, even though I'm blocking part of it, is showing an overview of the process of photosynthesis. It looks like a lot, but I promise you we're going to break it down and you're going to realize this is super easy. But the two stages of photosynthesis are light dependent reactions and light independent reactions. Now, based on the name, if we say something is dependent, think of like friend dependent. That means you are dependent or need friends. And if you're friend independent, that means you feel like you don't really need friends. Well, if the first stage of photosynthesis says it is light dependent, that means it is dependent upon light. And we also call this stage light reactions because it needs light and it also uses light here. The second stage is light independent because it doesn't need light in this stage. And we also call this stage the Calvin cycle, and this is because the person who discovered it incorporated their name, Calvin. I know you might be thinking, here's the equation of photosynthesis. How does that play into this whole process here? Well, these reactants and these products that are involved in our photosynthesis equation are happening in this diagram. It's just being broken apart into two stages. And I'm going to specify for you in the next few slides how this whole equation is actually represented in this diagram. So let's dive into the first stage of photosynthesis, which is the light dependent reactants. We're looking at just this part of the diagram. Everything you need to know about this stage is shown in this diagram. And it's super easy. We just have to analyze the arrows, and I'm going to help you through that. So the first thing we're going to name is that light dependent is also known as light reactions. That way, when you see the different names, you don't get confused. Where does this process occur? When we look in this diagram, I see the name light reactions, and I see that it has a line pointing to thylakoids. So this lets us know that light reactions occurs in the thylakoid of the chloroplast. Now that we know the location, let's go into the reactant. What is being taken in during this stage? And we know if something is being taken in because the arrows should be pointing towards the process. So here's light reactions. We see the arrows from light, and I see arrow pointing in from water. And I also see some arrows pointing in from NADP plus and ADP. Now, I'm going to save these two right here for a little later time to reference, but right now we're going to focus on the two main reactants, which is light and water. And again, I know they are reactants because they are pointing towards the process to show that it is being taken in. So in this big equation, if you're trying to wonder how this connects to this diagram, water and light are two out of the three reactants in the equation of photosynthesis. So now that we're taking in light and water, what is being made from the light and water that we're taking in? And we can see something is being made by the arrow showing that something is being released. Main arrow we see is oxygen, but we also see ATP and NADPH, which again, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But the main product that is made in light reactions is oxygen, which we can see is one out of our two products. So what is the main thing you need to know about light reactions? It's right here in this table. But just to let you know, NADPH is an electron carrier. And just by the name, it carries electrons. Where are these electrons coming from? It's coming from this light energy. And this light energy, when it enters the thylakoid, is going to carry with it some electrons. And it's also going to make ATP, which we know ATP is energy. It is taking this light energy and converting it into chemical energy, which we know is going to be really important when it comes to making our glucose because it's releasing it. Now, let's go into this question. Take 15 seconds, pause the video, and see if you can answer this question. Okay, hopefully you chose thylakoid and oxygen. So now let's go into the light independent reaction, which is also known as the Calvin cycle. The first question we're going to answer is, where does the Calvin cycle occur? Well, according to our diagram here, we see the Calvin cycle is located in this area and it says stroma. So the location is the stroma of the chloroplast. So now we're going to look at the reaction. So we should be looking at arrows that are pointing in or towards the Calvin cycle. The first main one we see is carbon dioxide. And as we can see, that is the third reactant of our photosynthesis equation. So far, everything is lining up with the overall knowledge of what we know about photosynthesis. It takes in carbon dioxide, and it also takes in some other things. We see it takes in ATP energy, and it also takes in that electron carrier, NADPH. And with the carbon dioxide, the ATP energy, and the electron carriers, it is going to make sugar, which is glucose. And the numeric for glucose is C6H12O6. I was actually the main thing you need to take away is knowing the Calvin cycle in the stroma of the chloroplast, the reactant is carbon dioxide, and the product is glucose. That is the main thing you need to know. So now that we did that second and final stage, go ahead and answer this question here. Pause the video and then see if you can get it right. You should have picked stroma and glucose. Hopefully you got that. Now that we discussed the two stages of photosynthesis, we need to talk about how they're dependent on one another. Because as you can see from this diagram, you have arrows pointing to and from each of these stages, kind of like a cycle. And that shows that these reactions or stages are dependent on one another. So now the question is, how are they dependent? So it says here, the Calvin cycle depends on the products of light reaction. This is the reason for not needing light energy in the Calvin cycle. And because it uses ATP energy. In light reactions, we can see that it is taken in light as a reactant, and one of the products is that it's going to make ATP, which is energy. We stated earlier that the Calvin cycle is known as the light independent, which means it doesn't need light. However, it still needs energy in order to convert carbon dioxide into this glucose. And that's where the ATP comes in. So it doesn't need light directly? No, but it does need the ATP that light dependent reaction creates. Now, the second bullet says NADP plus is an electron carrier. NADP plus and NADPH, right? They are electron carriers, but one has electrons on it and one is empty of electrons. Is the electron carrier with electrons? And a way that you can remember this is think of the H on the end tells you that it has electrons. And when it's NADP plus, think like it needs to add electrons. The Calvin cycle, taking in NADPH, taking in those electrons to make glucose, and then releasing an empty electron carrier, that is needed for light reactions. Because if I don't have an empty electron carrier, aka NADP plus, then that means that I cannot add electrons to it and they're just being stored up in the thylakoid. These two stages are dependent on one another. And while you do not need to know the depths, or you may or may not need to know the depths of NADPH and NADP plus, you do need to understand that these are dependent on one another. And if light reactions was not able to occur, if we didn't have light to be able to make the ATP that the Calvin cycle needs, then the Calvin cycle wouldn't be able to occur and glucose could not be made. If we didn't have carbon dioxide, we couldn't make glucose. If we didn't have water, we couldn't make the oxygen. So every single thing that's involved in this stage is extremely important for the process of photosynthesis. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the limitations, right? Because I just talked about, well, if we have this or don't have this, it's going to make a major impact. But I want to specifically name some of the things that you might hear. There are 5 limiting factors that can impact the rate of photosynthesis. So basically how quickly and efficiently photosynthesis can happen. The first is light intensity. How much light, how little light can impact how quickly photosynthesis can happen. The second is carbon dioxide concentration, and concentration just means amount. So the amount of carbon dioxide, because it is a reactant, can determine how quickly photosynthesis happens. The third is temperature. Then you have water concentration, and then you have soil pH. Again, all of these things are limiting factors. If you add too much, add too little, it's going to impact photosynthesis happening and the rate, right, the quickness at which it does happen. That is all for me today. Hopefully you got a good generic overview of photosynthesis, and I will see you at the next video. Bye.